What is up, you guys? The Springboks have emerged pleasingly bruised and battle-hardened, ready for bigger challenges. They accounted for Scotland 32 points to 15. This was a game many expected the Bokke to win, but Scotland did make life difficult for them. In this video, I'm going to break down the key moments in this game and what it means for the rest of the Springboks Northern Hemisphere tour. Let's get to it, guys. Now, even though not many people were calling for a Scottish win here in Edinburgh, there were some intriguing elements about this game. Once again, Rassie Erasmus went for the 7-1 bomb squad. That is always a little bit scary. Yes, you have unadulterated, pure South African beef ready to roll out and just hit, smash, tackle, destroy everything in their path in the second half. But if you do get an injury in the backs, could be a little bit problematic. Somehow Rassie has been lucky. He's gotten away with it so far, but it certainly signaled his intent to win this contest up front. But not only that, give some of his bigger names crucial game time ahead of the quick turnaround match against England at Twickenham next week. So you saw guys like Siya Kolisi, Peter Steph Totoy, they were actually on the bench, and a guy who I love, Kwagga Smith, he was playing his 50th game for the Springboks. He actually started at 8, and I kind of circled that selection because if you guys watch this channel, you know I'm a big fan of Kwagga. I just think he makes such a huge impact when he comes onto the pitch. My question was, can he sustain that for 60, 70 minutes? Can he make those same kind of inroads around the ruck? We got an answer today. Now, there were some pretty ominous signs in the first few minutes of this game from a Scottish perspective. The Bokke were able to roll down towards the Scottish 22. They laid on a rolling maul, applied a lot of pressure. They got a penalty. The ball came out. It was transferred back to Pollard. An inch-perfect crossfield kick to Mapimpi on the wing. He dots down. Honestly, they made it just look too easy. And you wonder if the Boks had sort of analyzed that left side of the field as a little bit of a problem area on defense for Scotland. Hold that thought because we're going to revisit it again later. But a very scary start from a Scottish perspective. The Springboks made it look like a training drill, with all due respect. But Scotland came to play, and there were signs that they were just going to throw absolutely everything, including the kitchen sink, at the Springboks. You know, I remember it was about the 9th minute of the game when the Scottish centre took a ball and flicked it through his legs. You don't see that every day, but you just realized, all right, they're prepared to do some unorthodox things here. They know that if they play conservatively, they're heading in one direction, and that's for a loss. All right, so I loved the valiant efforts of the Scots. I don't think they died wondering today. I really do think they threw everything they had at the Springboks, and that made this game actually probably a better spectacle than many of us expected. Unfortunately, the Scots did get a yellow card. Look, there was a clean out in the ruck. A couple of players actually ended up hitting the limbs of a South African player. It was a little bit reminiscent of, I want to say, Shannon Frizzell landing on Bongi Mnombi's lower leg in the Rugby World Cup final. And look, it's dicey. Clearly this was accidental, but you can't be taking out players around the knee. That can turn into missing 9 months or a year of rugby. Tear your ACL, tear your MCL, you're screwed. So I understand why World Rugby is really coming down on lower limb impacts around the ruck. There was a bit of confusion as there were 2 players, and it was sort of like, God, did they give the right guy the yellow card? But nevertheless, Scotland were down a man. It later got upgraded to a red card. So they did have to play down a man for a pretty serious chunk of this game, which makes their fight even more impressive, I must say. They were trying hard. They were bringing the Blitz defense. But as we saw in the way England has failed against New Zealand and now Australia, these Southern Hemisphere teams are figuring out the Blitz defense. And to be honest, the Springboks just look too canny on attack to kind of get sucked into just getting knocked back in midfield. They were finding space, not as much as you'd like from a South African perspective, but they were able to get the ball into space, get around that rush defense. They were kicking a fair bit too, just to keep the Scottish defense honest. And so you actually started to see the line speed kind of wilting a bit at times. The Scots got a little bit more passive. They were in 2 minds about whether they should hold and drift or just try and nail the box in midfield. The problem with nailing the box in midfield is that they're so skillful at at getting that ball out the back door that you are just inviting them to attack on the wing. But as we saw from Mapimpi's try and a few telling runs from the South African outside backs, the Scots were a little bit vulnerable in those outside channels today. But the Springboks set piece was kind of ramping up. The scrum was a phenomenal weapon today. Take a look at the stats here. 100% scrum win to 71%. That's a decisive total knockout victory. The lineout wasn't perfect, but in the 29th minute, Thomas du Toit did actually snatch a ball and go straight through the middle of the lineout, dot down. That was a bit of a killer blow for the South Africans heading into the half. But then you saw the Boks sort of being their own worst enemies at times. Now, I mentioned Kwagga Smith playing his 50th game. Well, he wasn't the guy that I know and love for the full duration of his time on the pitch. He looked a little bit rusty. There were knock-ons. He just wasn't quite there with his accuracy and timing, kind of laying over the ball, intentionally or not, just getting himself into bad spots. And I thought that was a little bit uncharacteristic, but symptomatic of some of the rust that the Boks did have in their systems. Now, here's the deal. New Zealand, for instance, played against Japan, right? That was a nice taper. They didn't play all of their A-listers, but a few of them were there in the squad. So they tapered nicely and hit the ground running against England. And I think that ultimately helped the Kiwis hold on and get that win in Twickenham. Their bench was pretty hardened. Well, the Boks didn't really have any warm-up of note coming into this game, and they just looked a little bit cold. It was actually reminiscent of Ireland against the All Blacks this past weekend, where we know Ireland's a great team. They were just ranked #1 in the world. I don't need to remind any South Africans that they did get the W over you in Durban, and yet they didn't look like that team capable of beating world champions in Dublin on the weekend. They looked like they were coming out of an ice bath. They just made uncharacteristic errors. They psychologically looked frazzled towards the end of the game. That shows me you're just not in the rhythm. And the Boks clearly were at a different class level compared to Scotland in this game. But a little bit of rust and inactivity actually made this game a bit more competitive than it might have been otherwise. So the Boks will be a lot better for this hit out, and that's the good news from a South African perspective. Now, I mentioned the Springboks targeting those wing channels. In the 34th minute, you saw the most beautiful, deft kick from Willie le Roux, the fullback, who's in his mid-30s for South Africa, but he looked excellent. He's very athletic, and he could be in the squad in 2027. I mean, never say never. Tom Brady played till 45 famously. I know you can't quite compare gridiron to rugby, but I don't think he's going to disappear anytime soon, but he put in a beautiful little kick. Mapimpi scores, and it was a little bit of deja vu where you just felt, oh boy, that's a bit of a weak spot there for Scotland. That left wing channel got exposed again here. And that was needed. The kicking game was quite a good weapon for the Springboks today. If you look at Lekanyuam, if you look at Esterhuizen in midfield who caught the eye, they did a good job straightening the attack. But I must say, at times I did feel the Boks, maybe it was the Scots weren't bringing that absolute heat on line speed that an England or an Ireland can bring. I don't think they're quite at that level of intensity. And because of that, the Boks were sort of able to deal with the initial blitz rush defense. But sometimes they moved the ball lateral almost prematurely. And what I noticed was that when they actually straightened in midfield, brought the attack back to the center, they started making more inroads. So a little bit of timing work to do there for Tony Brown, the Kiwi attack coach who's working with the South Africans. Look, at the end of the day, 4 tries to 0. Okay, so there's no way to spin that. The Boks were much better at finishing their opportunities. But in terms of upside on attack, long way to go on this tour, and that's good news for South Africans. Rassie emptied the bench in the second half, and you just kind of felt for the Scots. They're already, under the pump, and can you imagine that? Then you look over and say, oh, great. Sia Khaleesi and Peter Steph du Toit are coming on. Fantastic. Can't wait. And look, over the course of the game, the bomb squad did lift, but it didn't happen immediately. And in fact, what happened here was that the Scottish had the better of the game for about 20 minutes in the second half. They were hitting the rucks like men possessed. Their attack was looking much better. And the penalties started going their way. Again, this was not a vintage performance at the breakdown from the Springboks. Guy like Kwagga Smith not making the impact he usually does. And so the Boks were now still in the lead, but it was 15 points to 19, couple of Scottish penalty kicks. And They were holding on by a narrow margin. Here's the thing, though. I made a little note before this game. Very simple note. I wrote down, no tries, no win. That was my assessment of Scotland. I know they're plucky. I know they're good at the breakdown. I know their set piece is fairly solid. But my view was, if you can't land a kill shot when you get down to the Springbok 22, you are not going to win this game. And look at the difference here. I mean, these guys had opportunities, the Scots did. They were in the 22 plenty. I mean, take a look at the territory stats. They actually shaded the Springboks, 54%. Close to parity on possession, so it's not like they were totally starved of the ball, which the Springboks are pretty good at doing to teams. They had their chances. They kept taking the threes just to stay in touch with the Springboks, but you're not going to beat the world champion South Africans by just staying in touch. At a certain point, you have to get over the try line. And look, here's the thing. I mean, say they scored 2 converted tries, half as many tries as the Boks managed today. Well, look at the difference there. You know, now you're looking at, hey, this is winnable for Scotland. They couldn't do it. And I just think it's a lack of finishing power. Plenty of line breaks. Look, the line breaks were equal. Where's that stat? 5 and 5. Okay. So Scotland offered a little bit on attack. They broke the line. They created opportunities. The clinical finishing was not there. That was the biggest gulf in class between these teams. South Africa was scrappy, a bit rusty, but they nailed 4 opportunities. And that's where you get the 32 points. You know, 20 of those are tries. All right? All those Scottish points are Finn Russell kicks. So that's the difference right there. And funnily enough, you know, I think this game was won for South Africa in that purple patch where Scotland really came to life and was dominating. Scotland was dominating for much of a 20-minute period. But the fact that they couldn't convert that into a try, that was when I felt confident the Boks were going to win because they were holding on. All right. But you knew that the momentum was going to swing back their way. The Boks are too good not to seize back the initiative at a certain point, especially with that bomb squad coming on. And that is exactly what happened, as predicted. Peter Steph du Toit, his contribution started telling. He was just going into the heart of the ruck. He was making good meters there. Sia Khaleesi, to me, looks bigger and more powerful than he has in the past. He's certainly not a spent force. We know he's a great leader. He's probably the best captain in international rugby, but he looked strong, physical out there, added some crunch. And eventually, that scrum dominance I mentioned earlier, it really told. With a couple minutes to go in the game, the Boks absolutely put in a monstrous scrum and they were able to score a try off the back of that. That sealed the game. They basically just dribbled the ball, you know, at the boot of the scrum, got over the line. And yeah, that was a little bit of a rubbing it in the face of the Scottish pack. It was a dominant display there. So really, it was only Eben Etzebeth who played the whole game. You had a 7-1 bench split, forwards to backs. So one of the forwards was going to have to stay on the whole game. That was Etzebeth. He was phenomenal, as always. And I think, to a certain extent, you can be pleased as a South African because they didn't hit top gear today, but they were still comfortably ahead of a solid side, a solid Six Nations side. That's promising. But guys, I'm going to make a prediction here. I think there's a chance that the Boks could put a heavy win on England at Twickenham. I think the English are vulnerable right now. I think that loss to New Zealand really hurt them psychologically. They just dropped the game to Australia. That hurts even more. I think they are there for the taking. So if the Boks can get their preparation right, not overdo it physically, but get the mental side right, get the clarity around the game plan. I'd like to see the Springboks beat England by 10 to 20 points. And I think it's doable, on the basis of what I saw today. They got the job done. It's a good start to their tour, but they're going to be more clinical. They're going to be slicker. They're going to be more cohesive from here. And you're going to see some of those big stars who were on the bench today starting next week for sure. And, as for Kwagga Smith, put him back on the bench. That's my take. Great player, but I think his impact is really felt when he comes on for 25 or 30 minutes towards the end. All right, guys, what did you think of the game? Was that promising? Were you disappointed by the Springbok performance? Do you expect more? Hard to be disappointed when you win by twice as many points, but I know you guys are critical just like Kiwis are. Sound off. I'll be reading your comments. And guys, I'll be back with a few videos next week. Take it easy. I'll see you then. Bye for now.